Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, coming your way on a Sunday afternoon, wishing you, if you're a father, happy Father's Day. I am, and enjoyed the morning and the afternoon with my kids and had a great day. Time to talk some college football. We are awaiting Stephen M. Smith of Touchdown Alabama to talk up the Tide today. So hopefully Stephen will be able to join us, but I didn't want to let the line hang out there too long before I jumped on with a 4 o'clock notification out there. It hit about 4:10, so I thought I should jump on the line. And even if Stephen is not able to join us, of course, we can talk college football. Again, happy Father's Day. I hope you've enjoyed your day and the weekend with your kids. And otherwise, we all have fathers, and hopefully they've been good to us. So if that's the case and you have yet to be a father, hopefully you've enjoyed some time with your dad or have been able to say happy Father's Day today. And hopefully enjoying a beautiful day as we are here in Connecticut. So let's look at our recent content and see what jumps out to you, and I'll let you know what we've got planned over the next few days. I've taken notes over the weekend on my top 10 quarterbacks across the nation. So I looked at 34 quarterbacks. I whittled it down to 10, and I will release my list of top 10 quarterbacks in the nation. Also, my top 10 running backs. I've looked over about 30 or 40 running backs. I've got a top 10 listed right now. I'm not real comfortable with it. Want to do some additional thought and research and list my top 10 running backs very soon. Top 10 non-conference games I've got coming your way as well. I've got the notes. I actually cut the video. And much like the beginning of the live stream the other night, there was no audio on the video. So that doesn't necessarily work. I'm not good at sign language, and you're probably not good at reading it, so I haven't really gone that route. So my top 10 non-conference games coming your way as soon as I recut that one. I'm also looking at some of the best games non-conference under the radar, and we'll possibly look at that as well, as I'm still awaiting Stephen M. Smith of Touchdown Alabama to join the live stream. Otherwise, I will take your questions and comments as I look through some of our more recent content out there. Late last night, released my top 10 dark horse teams for 2018. So these aren't necessarily teams that I think will make the college football playoff. Obviously, there's 10 here, and there's only 4 playoff spots. I really don't think any of those teams are going to make the playoff, at least based on what I believe my prediction to be at this point. That won't be released until sometime in August. But I've got some interesting selections of teams that I think have the best potential to be dark horse teams and to do more than what is generally expected. So for a team like Maryland, who went 4-8 last season, I'm not expecting them even to come through. Even if they pull through as a dark horse, that doesn't mean 11-1. That means to me they go 7-5, 8-4. And they beat somebody of significance and go from 4-8 and make that next jump to postseason play. For a team like Oregon, who won 7 games last year, or Iowa, who won 8 games, maybe that's winning 10 or 11 or winning a division championship. So there are different levels to dark horses based on how I see it, or a surprise season, just like a disappointment. If I'm going to do a list on most disappointing teams for 2018, that would look different for Ohio State than it would for Northwestern. For Northwestern, if they go 5-7 or 6-6 this year, yeah, that's going to be a disappointment. At Ohio State, that would be a disaster. If Ohio State goes 9-3 this year, or maybe even 10-2, that's a disappointment. So different levels of dark horse status or disappointing status depending on the team and the program. We have also released over the past few days, had a live stream on, I believe this was Friday night. Had a whole lot of fun with this, even though you've got to make your way. Although I did eliminate the audio issues at the beginning and re-released the video from Friday night. The live stream where we looked at the BCS years 1998, 99, 2000, and 01, and the fallacies in the BCS, and what would have been a top 4 college football playoff for those seasons. Heisman Trophy odds, national championship odds, and we also delved into the NFL a little bit with Steve Merrill from Pro Sports Info. That video was released on Friday, and I got to think that these videos with Steve would do extremely well, considering how many of you are interested in the odds, the handicapping, the strategies, the lines, and possibly laying a couple bucks on a football game from time to time. And Steve is one of the very best in explaining smart money, the values, and the sharp money out there. And he joined us to talk Heisman odds and some of the best dark horses there and some of the best odds for the national championship race. He, like I, really likes Texas. Not that I've selected Texas to go to the college football playoff for sure, but at 35-1 odds, that's looking pretty good for a possible big game. Big Friday on Mark Rogers TV. In addition to the live broadcast at night, looking at the BCS years 98, 99, 01, and 2001, and then also looking at the odds for the Heisman and the national championship race, we were pleased to be joined by Jerry DiNardo from the Big Ten Network. So Big Ten football fans, that's a must-watch as we carve through all the contenders, East and West, really only bypassed a couple of teams like Illinois and Rutgers, Maryland, those kind of teams, but really dissected the top 4 or 5 in each division. From Jerry DiNardo, Big Ten Network, that was released on Friday. That's about 5 or 6 videos deep on the playlist. Check that one out. Miami talk, of course, was interesting on Wednesday night with Cam Underwood. And then we had James Coleman jump in from Florida State to get things riled up just a bit with the Miami and Florida State talk. The night prior to that, it was Florida State. So rivalry month hasn't been quite the success that I anticipated from a volume standpoint because it's so difficult to get 2 people plus myself together. But in terms of the conversations, they have been amazing. Ohio State, Michigan, Florida State, Miami, Kentucky, Tennessee, USC, UCLA, Florida State, Clemson, they've been great. All right, I'm going to jump on the chat and see what you guys have for me today. Again, over the next couple of days, look out for top 10 non-conference games for 2018, top 10 quarterbacks, top 10 running backs, and I also may release a top 10 games under the radar for this season. There are some really interesting games out there that I think could factor into conference championship races that we're not necessarily thinking about right now. And are just some really interesting, intriguing matchups, non-conference, that may not necessarily factor into the national championship, but are intriguing. Boston College, Purdue, that kind of matchup really fascinates me and could be interesting. All right, on through the chat. Yeah, happy Father's Day to you, NCIS Fanatic 21. I'm playing with 1995 rosters on NCAA 14 right now. See, that's something I don't dive into. I know that they do a bit on our friends at SG1 Sports, so I'd like to let everyone know about SG1 Sports and our friends over there. We have posted some videos over there as well. Not more Alabama trash. They don't even have a schedule. Cover them when they walk into the playoffs. Cupcake champs. Fill in. Let's back off just a bit. The SEC Western Division is the best conference in the best division in college football, top to bottom. The Big Ten East would be tougher in the first 4 slots, but top to bottom, I still have to say that the SEC Western Division is extremely difficult in terms of quality and depth. And fill in, believe me, if you were with us around playoff selection time, I couldn't have said it more plainly that Alabama did not earn a playoff spot and gave all the metrics and all the reasoning and all the logic. Alabama went out and won the national championship, so they took that opportunity, and I give them all the credit of doing that. And I did predict them to defeat Clemson, and I did pick them to beat Georgia in the national championship game, so it's not like I didn't think that they could do it. It's that they did not earn it. So I understand the cupcake scheduling, and Alabama, Louisville, that's a good game, a decent matchup for Alabama to schedule out of conference if they had another game. So if Alabama was Florida and they were scheduling Louisville, my hat's off to you, because Florida has to take on Florida State. So if they also take on Louisville, good matchup. Excellent. But for Alabama, 2 consecutive years to have their marquee games be Louisville and Duke, that's weak. So I agree with you there, fill in. But they can't do anything about the SEC, and they can't do anything about this particular year. They're facing Tennessee and Kentucky in the other division. So no Georgia, no South Carolina, and maybe even Florida comes back and is a decent team this year. No Florida on Alabama's schedule. It's Tennessee and Kentucky. They can't do anything about that. Last year, it was Tennessee and Vandy, the 2 worst teams in the division. So Alabama, with as bad as Tennessee has been, except for those couple of years under Butch Jones a few years ago, as bad as Tennessee has been over the last 10 years, Alabama can't control that, and they always play Tennessee. So they get a light touch out of the SEC Eastern Division. All right. Big Papi JT taking a shot at LSU. Should have done 2002 on Friday night. Yeah, we'll have to get to that. And NCIS Fanatic 21, what I would like to do with the past seasons in college football, and this is not necessarily the best time to do that because I'm focusing on 2018 and top 10 lists and schedule rankings and team rankings. The time to do that would be right after spring football, right at the end of April. I should have really focused on some of those historical lists, all-time best programs, looking at the BCS or looking at the playoff situation or college football year to year, going back through history. I love to do that kind of stuff, but now's the time to crunch toward media days. We're only about a month away from SEC football media days. Believe that. So, yeah, I just kind of rambled and ranted the other night on Friday night looking at 1998 through 2001. I would like to take each year, produce a separate video, and really dissect what happened and what should have happened and where the BCS screwed up and where the College Football Playoff Committee screwed up. Although I have said from day one that they've got the impossible job and they've done a reasonably good job selecting these teams. It's made almost total sense. Almost. They've screwed up a couple times, and they've been presented with a few years that were extremely difficult. Last year, extremely difficult to not screw someone over completely. And 2014 was impossible. You had all those teams with 1 loss, and you only had Florida State with no losses. They'll lose to LSU and still go to the playoffs. Disgusting. That's if they beat Auburn, and Auburn doesn't screw up elsewhere. Donovan chiming in for LSU. I think the Big Ten East is the best division. Bama does not really need a tough out of conference because the SEC is so good. Okay, Big Papi JT. Let's think about this. Regardless of how good we think any particular conference is, we can only rate and rank the conferences based on the competition between the conferences. Because you know what? Regardless of how good or how not so good or how horrible the conference is, go to the conference standings and add up the records. Add up the records in every conference. And you know what you'll get. Same number of wins, same number of losses. Once they start conference play, maybe a football scout, maybe a coach, a longstanding coach, if he watches every game, can tell me and differentiate the conferences. But once they start playing each other, they play in a silo. They all go 500. You have to take the results of the non-conference games. And the reason we need to do this is because we're leaving a conference out of the playoff. If we weren't leaving a conference out of the playoff, then it wouldn't much matter if they played really good non-conference games. But we're leaving a conference out, at least one conference. Last year, we left 2 conferences out. And if Notre Dame ever gets involved, we're going to leave at least 2 conferences, maybe 3 conferences out. We left a conference champion out 2 years ago. Well, we did obviously every year, but we left an extra conference champion out this past season And we left one out in 2016. This is why we need quality non-conference games, and this is why they mean something. Because if Alabama loses a game and still goes on to win the SEC, and they're competing against a lot of one-loss teams for a playoff spot, how do we know that the SEC is really that good unless the SEC plays quality non-conference competition? And that goes for everyone. I'm not just picking on the SEC. All right, what do you guys have here? Not really. It's not their fault FSU was trashed this year. So, yeah, the Florida State Bama game, not Bama's fault. And it's often argued that you can't fault Team A because they didn't know Team B was going to be down because they scheduled the series 10 years ago. I totally understand that. That's why we need to put the scheduling in the hands of a committee. I'll take it on because I would schedule 9 conference games, 3 non-conference games, and give 1 to the school to schedule an FCS or a group of 5, and then the other 2 games would be scheduled by the committee, which would determine an even playing field. And we can schedule it. Why do schedules need to be contracted 5 or 10 years in advance? Who else does that? Is the NBA looking at their schedule for 10 years from now, or the NFL or anybody else? No. And their scheduling is more complicated than college football scheduling. It can be done in the off season. Wouldn't it be great if on May 1st every year, that would be the release of the college football schedule? Every May 1st, college football fans would be waiting, knowing that, okay, I'm a Georgia fan, and I know we're going to play the SEC East, and I know we're going to play Auburn and Mississippi State out of the West, but I have no idea who we're going to play. Other than Georgia Tech, I would protect that game. Other than that, I don't know who we're going to play this year. And you talk about a anticipated day for college football fans, the schedule release, May 1st. No reason not to do that. These games don't have to be scheduled 10 years in advance. And then schools, and not necessarily the schools, but the fans of the schools make excuses because we didn't know Texas was going to be down, or we didn't know Oregon was going to be down. So, yes, Alabama, no discredit to them scheduling Florida State. But when you schedule Louisville or Duke, especially Duke, Louisville, you expect them to be decent, and they will be decent this year, but they're not top 10 or 15 decent. And Louisville's a bit of a wild card. If you're scheduling Oklahoma or USC or Ohio State or somebody like that, you have a pretty good idea that they're going to be really good. Yes, you could catch them in a down year or a down cycle. It's possible. It has happened, but it's a lot less likely. All right. Well-rested teams do good in the playoffs. Not many injuries. Fill in, of course, taking another shot at Bama with their rest. And the most meaningless game of the college football season last year, the Iron Bowl, where the winner was penalized by having to play maybe the best team in the country in the SEC championship game in a rematch. And how many times do teams lose rematches in conference championship games? We talked about this with our guy from the LGG about a year ago. Most of the time, the team loses the rematch, like 60% of the time. So Auburn was penalized for winning the Iron Bowl, and Bama was gifted a week off and not having to risk its one-loss season in the SEC championship game. Most meaningless game of the season last year, the Iron Bowl. All right, Bama's schedule would be a joke in every conference except 1 or 2 games. Nothing's going to protect you against Florida in an SEC championship game, or defensive line is going to crush them. Gators 42, Bama 14. I love your idea, Mark. It would be like the NFL schedule release that happens every year in April. Exactly. I think I need to cut that video, too. Kansas State will slump without Bill Snyder. It's funny that you bring up that Navy Thomas 8. I was going through SB Nation. That's the name of the site. SB Nation. And their metrics guy, Bill Conley. I was trying to think of his name. Bill Conley releases an in-depth, very analytical preview of each team. And I looked at Kansas and Kansas State last night, and the Kansas State metrics versus what the eventual record was last year was astounding. Based on their offensive and defensive metrics, the advanced numbers, they should have finished 70th in the country. They should have been a 5-17, but they won 8 games. They beat UCLA in a bowl game, and they finished strong. And it was another remarkable job by Bill Snyder. And there were a lot of metrics given by Bill Conley to why Bill Snyder is so effective, giving back up to the perception, which is reality, that Bill Snyder is just a hell of a coach. All right. LSU is going to take out my attitude on you, and there's nothing you can do about it either. So we got some LSU, Florida, back and forth. Big Ten championship game was also pretty meaningless in 17. Yeah, as it turned out, it was, although we know that if Wisconsin would have won, they would have kept Alabama out of the playoff. I actually know Ohio State fans, I can think of one, who was rooting for Wisconsin to win that game, to shut out Alabama, knowing that Ohio State, or at least thinking that the Buckeyes were going to be shut out by the College Football Playoff Committee, and he was right. Don't make excuses for the Florida football team. I think Michigan was a practice game. Nobody cares. Miami thinks they have attitude, but they're just pretenders. The end of the Big 12 comes in 2023-24, so Navy Thomas will have to discuss that sometime. So you must be thinking about more contraction out of the Big 12. Miami has dominated Florida for the past 2 decades. Yeah, I believe they've won, 4 of 5, 5 of 6, something in that range. Florida won a few years ago. I think that was the last meeting between the two schools, and probably the most meaningful, or at least high-profile game between the two teams recently, somewhat recently, it's not been that recent, was in the 2000 Sugar Bowl, in which Miami won 37-20. And really one of the games that in a sense, launched the Miami dynasty in 1993. In 1983 was a season-opening loss against Florida, 28-3. Howard Schnellenberger's team went down with, of course, Bernie Kosar at quarterback, a freshman at quarterback. Yes, a freshman at quarterback. And went down big in the opener against a really good Florida team, but then they rebounded to win 10 consecutive games, and of course the national championship over what was considered to be an unbeatable Nebraska team, 31-30. Why is Auburn the type of team that beats Bama but loses to teams like UCF or Washington? Lamar Stevens. Well, we have yet to see Lamar whether Auburn will lose to Washington. Auburn last year, of course, ended up losing 4 games, but to really good teams in Clemson, Georgia, Central Florida. They did lose to LSU. Oklahoma and one other to the Big Ten, maybe Kansas for basketball. I don't know that the Big Ten, maybe Thomas, is going to be making any basketball-related decisions just to boost up the conference and take on that kind of dead weight in terms of football. They've done that with Maryland and Rutgers. And there's some hope that Maryland's going to be decent in the next few years, but basically the Big Ten sacrificed football quality for eyeballs. And the East Coast and what they call the Beltway with Baltimore, D.C., and New York. And it's not proven to be the best move right now. It hasn't been catastrophic. It's been catastrophic in terms of perception and quality on the field, but in terms of numbers, I believe that Rutgers and Maryland will not weigh down the Big Ten considerably in terms of, again, at the gate financially in terms of eyeballs. If they don't take Kansas, then maybe Oklahoma State package would make sense. There's no such thing as making excuses for Florida. All right. So what else do we kick up here? In recent days, we had some Tennessee talk as well. We also, I hope you guys caught the video that we did the other day with Mike LaValle from Last Word on College Football on unbreakable records in college football. That was a whole lot of fun. Tony Sands with 58 carries for Kansas in 1991, speaking of Kansas football. David Klingler averaging 475 yards passing per game in 1990. And I don't remember what the other one had to do with Houston scoring, I believe. And of course, we talked Miami football and recruiting and defensive front seven with Cam Underwood the other day, and need to get Cam back on. And I really would like to go through all the positional units in college football, and that's going to be difficult. We've made some headway here and there with Ohio State and Penn State and Michigan and some others, but not so much elsewhere. We have Stephen M. Smith of Touchdown Alabama attempting to join us. Hopefully we can hear him. Stephen, are you with us?
Can you hear me?
Here he is. Stephen, how are you doing today?
Cool. Doing well.
Excellent. Good to see you.
As always, man. As always. So we rocking the white shirt today.
Why not? Actually, when you typically get the dress shirt out of me, it's for a few different reasons. Either I just came from work, I'm going to work, or I've got like a sweaty, smelly T-shirt on, and I just toss it to the side and grab a dress shirt out of the closet. That's what that was. I was outside playing catch with my son, and then I threw on the white shirt.
Nothing wrong with that, man.
So, Stephen, I don't know if you saw this. I was just scanning online last night looking for some college football nuggets. And it was released. I don't have my notes in front of me, but it was released that 24/7 Sports had an article concerning Tua Tagovailoa's hand size. Did you see this?
I didn't see that. However, what I saw from 247 Sports was Tagovailoa's brother, Taulia Tagovailoa, visiting the Tennessee Volunteers this week. He is taking his official visit to Rocky Top to look at the facilities being ran by Jeremy Pruitt, who's the head coach of the Volunteers, as Pruitt and his staff trying to flip Tagovailoa from Alabama to the Volunteers. Now, of course, you have a lot of Alabama fans believing that with Tua already in pocket at Alabama, that Taulia, there's no worry, there's no fear that he will follow his brother from Hawaii to the Crimson Tide. But Taulia is taking his official visit, or is on his official visit this weekend, to the Volunteers, to Rocky Top with Jeremy Pruitt. Pruitt, who has already convinced Brandon Kennedy, who decided that he's done with Alabama as a graduate transfer. Pruitt flipping Kennedy from Alabama to Tennessee, the offensive lineman. So Pruitt trying to flip Tagovailoa, the younger Tagovailoa, from Alabama commitment-wise to the Volunteers, as he is on his official visit.
So it's not a done deal that he's going to settle on the Tide.
Well, right now he's committed to Alabama, but unlike Tua, Taulia has not completely shut down his recruitment. He is still taking visits, unlike Tua, where when Tua committed to Alabama, he shut everything down and said, look, I'm not taking any more visits. I'm not checking any more phone calls, any more emails. I'm going to Alabama. I'm going to Nick Saban, and that's the end of it. Taulia is still open to visits. He's still open to different options. And right now, one of the options he was open to was taking that official visit to Tennessee. So he is taking that visit to the Volunteers this week. Will he choose to flip that commitment from Alabama to Tennessee remains to be seen, but he is on that visit.
All right, good info there on the Tagovailoa recruitment visiting Tennessee and committed to the Tide, of course. So back to this deal, Stephen, and I don't know if you'll have any comment on this. When I initially saw it, I thought it was a bit of clickbait, but then it seemed to be somewhat legitimate. Now that I see that Kirk Herbstreit has responded favorably. So it's a 247 article by Chris Hummer. He mentions Tua, of course, burst onto the scene, throws the game-winning touchdown pass, lists his height and weight, and then makes NFL comparisons. Of course, they started rolling through once he wins the national championship game, and all sorts of people are comparing him to NFL quarterbacks. Well, down here it then says, I don't know where this these kind of measurement. Oh, okay. This measurement was taken at the 2016 Army All-American game. And Tua's mitts checked in at 10.13 inches, which means absolutely nothing to me until you compare it to other quarterbacks, some of his contemporaries. So, for example, Jake Fromm, in the same class, much smaller hands at 8.75 inches. Sam Darnold's not the largest, but guys like Drew Brees, Russell Wilson, Brett Favre, other great all-time quarterbacks have evidently large hands. So Kirk Herbstreit responds, I feel like the size of a quarterback's hands is more significant than his actual arm strength. Interesting info on Tua. Makes sense watching him throw with such amazing accuracy. Thanks for the info. So apparently many great quarterbacks have large hands, which makes total sense. You can grip the football, and it's just like you or I, Stephen, if we went outside and we took an actual regulation size football, and we'd be able to throw the football to whatever degree. But if we then got our hands on a smaller size football, you're able just to spin it much easier. Maybe not more accurately, but it's easier with a flick of a wrist. So Tua's hand size are somewhat legendary, I guess.
Well, right now the biggest thing is always, can he handle the football? Can he throw the football with accuracy? Can he grip the football? We see a lot of times where hand size becomes more of a bigger deal in the National Football League versus college football, especially when you have guys like Daniel Jeremiah, Bucky Brooks, Mike Mayock, and NFL scouts that have a microscope on this thing, especially for a lot of these kids that go to the AFC North, where you're in the cold weather playing for the Cincinnati Bengals or the Baltimore Ravens, Pittsburgh Steelers, where you have to have those big hands to hold the football due to all the crazy weather conditions that go on up there. Or the NFC North, when you look at the Detroit Lions, the Green Bay Packers, the Minnesota Vikings, that type of deal, or even the AFC East, where you have the Buffalo Bills, the New England Patriots. So for a lot of these NFL media analysts, they look at hand size more so for the guys that are being drafted in colder climate areas due to the consistent weather change. How will you throw in the rain when you have a slick ball? How will you throw in the cold where that ball is hard as a rock, hard as a brick, and you got snow and wind chill at minus 10 degrees? So it's different from college football due to the different teams that play in colder climates, and you're drafted to one of those teams. But at the end of the day, when you look at a guy like Tua Tagovailoa, it's interesting to look at the hand size to see how could he play in years to come, or if he was, or in college football, if he was to go on the road and play a team in a colder climate, how would that guy fare? So it's always an interesting debate to bring up when you look at the hand size of different guys.
Now, I knew, Stephen, I was opening myself up to much ridicule and a whole lot of what we could call jocularity on the live chat as soon as I went to the conversation concerning hand size. I knew that I would bring out all sorts of comments there. That went without saying, but it's regardless a legitimate conversation that I came across online regarding Tua's hand size. We got Stephen M. Smith of Touchdown Alabama on the line. You can also catch his show The Way It Is, Fox at 97.9, Monday through Friday, 2 to 4 Central Time. And also, Stephen has joined us a number of times in recent weeks, starting to break down Bama positional units. We looked at the secondary, wide receivers, offensive line. Stephen, I don't know if you're prepared for anything today. We really didn't discuss which way we were going with today's discussion. I actually contacted you because I saw this note about Tua Tagovailoa and thought that maybe you had seen the same thing, because it doesn't seem like anything gets by you, but I guess you can't see everything all the time. Any positional unit that you're ready to break down?
Let's see. That's a good question. I would love to dive into. I would love to dive into the defensive. I dive into the defensive line today. Defensive line be an interesting one.
All right, big D-line talk out of Stephen and myself. Of course, the Tide. You could look at just any positional unit, and the draft choices flow right through the system each and every year. But I don't know that there's a unit aside from possibly secondary that's been as prominent in this dominance by Alabama football, and especially moving players onto the NFL draft as defensive line. And in recent years, adding that element of very explosive edge rushers to that dominance in the front seven. So, Stephen, how do we look in 2018?
Well, right now, first and foremost, Alabama needing to have that guy to replace Daron Payne at defensive tackle, nose guard, somebody that played 3 years as a starter from 2015 to 2017. Not a big-time sack guy, but Daron Payne, huge in stopping the run, clogging up that middle, setting the tone there from the interior front. And right now, the guy that looks to be the one to carry on that legacy is another Birmingham guy, Daron Payne from Shades Valley High School in Birmingham, Alabama. His replacement could potentially be Quinnen Williams from Winona High School in Birmingham. Quinnen Williams had a very good spring of a 6'5" redshirt junior, if I'm not mistaken, out of Winona High School in Birmingham, 6'5", 290 pounds, going into that 300-pound frame there, could potentially put on that extra 10 pounds of weight as we venture into summer workouts and fall camp. So Quinnen Williams right now has been grabbing the attention of the coaching staff. Along with him, I look at Johnny Dwight, the redshirt senior out of Rochelle, Georgia, at 6'3", 301 pounds. He's already got some experience at that defensive tackle spot. Johnny Dwight, who started his career as a defensive tackle, was switched to some offensive duties to play tight end, but is now back on that defensive front. So therein lies Johnny Dwight. Also, Phidarian Mathis at 6'4", 300 pounds. Phidarian Mathis, who came into that 2017 signing class from my Neville High School in Monroe, Louisiana. And then also you've got two freshmen coming in, Christian Barmore and Stephon Wynn. Stephon Wynn's already here, 6'4", 308 pounds from Carolina, and Christian Barmore also a part of that 2018 class. So there lies a couple of names that are battling for that defensive tackle spot. A lot of names that will get some playing time, but I look at Quinnen Williams as the name that will win that spot, replacing the likes of Daron Payne, who is now in the National Football League. On the defensive end spots, Isaiah Buggs, Raekwon Davis, those are your two starters, bar none, Isaiah Buggs and Raekwon Davis. Behind those two, I like what LeBron Ray brings to the table. I like what Jerez Parks, who took a gray shirt for the 2018 class, but I like what he potentially brings. And then on top of that, you have your outside linebackers that will also be serving on that defensive line front in Anthony Jennings, Christian Miller, Terrell Lewis, Christopher Allen, those guys that played last year. Also, Jamie Mosley, throwing him into the mix. You can't forget how Nick Saban loves having his outside rush jack linebackers come down put a hand in the ground and play that defensive end position a lot like what he did with Tim Williams and Ryan Anderson in years past. So defensive line, very tenacious group, very deep group, being ran by defensive line coach Craig Kulagowski, who's coming over from the Missouri Tigers. In the last 2 years, Kulagowski coached with the Miami Hurricanes. So aside from defensive tackle, getting that guy to replace the dominance that Daron Payne brought, Quentin Williams, I see as the guy anchoring that spot. And along with him, a lot of veteran experience returning to the staff next season.
Stephen M. Smith of Touchdown Alabama joining us to talk Tide on a Sunday live stream. We have knocked out the defensive backs, the wide receivers, and the offensive line, and Stephen giving us a rundown of the defensive front for the Tide with Daron Payne most notably moving on to the NFL draft. Quentin Williams only got in on 20 tackles, but very disruptive. 6.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks for Quentin Williams in 2017. Stephen, I see a few different notes on the chat that we may want to draw some attention to. These more projected toward the NFL, and you had talked about, we had mentioned that in the past few weeks we covered defensive backs. Minkah Fitzpatrick, not getting a lot of love from our guy Lamar Stevens, who says that he's never going to make a Pro Bowl. What are your thoughts about Minkah's prospectus at the next level?
Well, right now, head coach Adam Gase is in love with him. I mean, if you look at the Miami Dolphins online sites, I mean, every time you look on the internet, Adam Gase is saying something positive about Minkah. Now, the main thing is, where will they play him? Will they play him at corner? Will they play him at safety? Will they play him at nickel? That all remains to be seen. That's kind of maybe the one downside to Minkah is during his time in Alabama, he never really just grew in one particular spot. When he came out of high school, Old Bridge, New Jersey in 2015 from St. Peter's Prep School to Alabama, he played outside island corner. He came to Alabama hoping to play in that same spot, was pushing the likes of Tony Brown, Marlon Humphrey, Cyrus Jones, and also Maurice Smith to kind of play in that spot. That did not happen. His freshman year played in that nickel slot cornerback role, that nickel star role. And from there, he moved to safety due to Eddie Jackson getting hurt and wanting to take on that role a little bit, but never was a true outside island corner. So that brings up the thought of Minkah being that tweener. Where would he play? Would he play at corner? Would he play at star? Will he play at safety at the next level in the National Football League? And that's the question that Adam Gase and the Miami Dolphins face. Now, right now, they are looking to play him more so at safety. Can he fit that spot? I think he can fit that spot. I mean, when you look at what he's done, rookie minicamp, organized team activities, and thus far in mandatory minicamp, he has really impressed the entire coaching staff. So Adam Gase loves him. Can he continue to do his thing will be the question. But if you go in that locker room to the Miami Dolphins, not making the Pro Bowl doesn't seem to be the case in South Beach. They see this guy being a perennial All-American type of player, or all NFL type of player, all pro type of player.
So obviously when you win 5 national championships in 9 years, you have got some haters out there, and we always have some Bama haters here on the chat, but we invite all college football fans, regardless.
I mean, come on in. Come on in.
That's it. And so as soon as we mentioned Minkah Fitzpatrick and you talked about Tony Brown, there was a little back and forth about Tony Brown on here as well. Leon Hurricanes in particular saying that Tony Brown will have to learn how to cover in the pros.
We'll have to learn how to cover, but I think the biggest thing with Tony is not letting his emotions get the best of him. That has always been his biggest problem at Alabama. It's never been a talent thing with Tony, an athleticism thing with Tony. I mean, you can see the fact that he is an athletic specimen, a gorilla in the weight room throughout his time at Alabama, always in the weight room, always in the gym, always working out. But the biggest thing with Brown, not just the covering skills in a man-to-man press coverage, but not letting his emotions at the next level get the best of him. We saw it at Alabama when he's been too emotional. He's been off the field. He's been in Nick Saban's quote-unquote doghouse, not having that playing time. We saw his suspension from the college football playoff in 2015, did not get a chance to play there. We saw where there was the reported 4 to 5 game suspension by the NCAA to start the 2016 season. There's always been situations where Tony knows what to do, but there are times when you could not emotionally place him. If he could keep his passion in line, if he can channel his passion to being on the field, to being a quality teammate and an on-field star, I think Tony Brown could be one of the biggest steals in an undrafted that happened for this year. His biggest enemy is himself and making sure that emotionally he's in line.
Stephen M. Smith of Touchdown Alabama joining us to talk Tide here. As much as we can flag him down, because it's always informative, insightful, and entertaining with Stephen. And you can catch him on a show the way it is, Fox 97.9, Monday through Friday, 2 to 4 Central Time. Download the app if you're not in the area. And also go to Touchdown Alabama here on YouTube, because they post excellent videos on Bama breakdowns during the offseason, getting us set for 2018. As soon as I started the live chat, just thought I would strike up the live stream before you jumped on, Stephen. The Bama hatred started with the schedule. So I'm going to take you through the schedule, and you give me your thoughts. But I certainly addressed some of the comments coming in about Alabama's schedule. So my thoughts are that when you're scheduling these teams 8 and 10 years prior to the actual meeting on the field, you don't know how good they're going to be, obviously. Now, you have a better idea of how good Oklahoma or USC or Michigan or Ohio State or Clemson's going to be than you do TCU or Oregon or somebody who's on that second or third tier, like a Louisville this year for Alabama, which I believe that the Cardinals, despite the loss of Lamar Jackson, and that seems to be the focus, and it should be, rightfully so. He was one of the most dynamic players in college football, if not one of the best quarterbacks. And the focus is on, well, he's gone, Alabama's going to have a cakewalk over Louisville. And that might very well be the case. It's still a decent opponent, a typically top 15 to 20 opponent to schedule. Now, we'll see how good the Cardinals are this year. But a lot of ire toward Alabama's schedule. I did defend the Florida State game, obviously, last year. The Seminoles lost DeAndre Francois and fell apart, but Alabama faced them at their best. Whatever that was, we'll never know how good they would have been. But the Duke scheduling next year, I have an issue with that. Alabama can't control who they play in the other division. That's rotational. People take shots at the Kentucky and Tennessee this year, and Tennessee and Vandy last year, but you can't control the division opponents. So, Stephen, your thoughts about the 2018 schedule, and if you need me to read it through, I certainly will.
I thought that it could have used some work. I mean, when I look at the schedule, I like the fact that Alabama's got Louisville on there. Lamar Jackson not being with the Cardinals is tough, but with Bobby Petrino being a quarterback's coach, being a quarterback's guy, Petrino will have something in place. He will look to make that game as competitive as possible. And then you have Louisiana Lafayette, which, you know, that's Louisiana Lafayette. I mean, I would have loved to have seen UCF scheduled there. You've got the Citadel on the schedule, which is basically a military school in Carolina. Did not want to see the Citadel there, but that's who Alabama drew out of the hat there. Arkansas State. I mean, the last time we saw Arkansas State in somewhat relevancy was when Gus Malzahn went to coach Arkansas State for a year, following Auburn not giving him the job after what he was able to do from the recruiting standpoint of bringing in Cam Newton and things of that nature. And when you dive into the SEC, you have to play Missouri and Drew Lock, good quarterback. Drew Lock, very experienced quarterback. He's coming off a near 4,000-yard passing season. You got Demarie Crockett in the backfield. Yes, you lost Jamon Moore at wide receiver to the National Football League. The biggest deal with Missouri is, does Barry Odom have a defense to put with the offense? That's the biggest concern. Ole Miss, I mean, Matt Luke trying to deal with the NCAA sanctions and not having Shea Patterson, Jordan Ta'amu could be a big blessing for that team this year. Of course, it also landed Matt Corral in the recruiting cycle. Ole Miss keeps a talented crop of receivers, and that's not different this year. A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, DeMarcus Lodge, all those three guys are freaks of nature. For Mississippi State, it's how healthy is Nick Fitzgerald? If Nick Fitzgerald's healthy, look out for Mississippi State. If Fitzgerald is not healthy, then here comes the question of how good really is Mississippi State. So the schedule as a whole, due to the SEC, you're finally getting the tough coaches, the more challenging coaches back to the conference with Jimbo Fisher, with the likes of Kirby Smart, with guys like Dan Mullen. You're finally getting the challenging coaches back to the respective conference. But the thing about it is, it's not how good the teams are when they play Alabama. It's how good the teams are after you play Alabama. That's always the biggest concern. When you play Alabama, how you fight, how you compete against the Tide is always the big deal. But after you play Alabama, what's your resolve? Can you pick yourself off the mat should you lose to the Crimson Tide and continue to win to make that resume stronger? Or even if you were to beat Alabama, do you continue to win? Because sometimes there are teams that beat Alabama and struggle with continuing to win. So for the SEC, it's how is your resolve after you play Alabama, win or lose? And also at the same time, I would have loved to have seen the Crimson Tide go out there and schedule a UCF, go out there and schedule maybe a Florida State or a Michigan or a more tough opponents outside the conference. But you stated it beautifully there, Mark. When you're scheduling, you're doing this 5 to 10 years out, 5 to 6 years out. You don't know how good that team could really be, which makes for it to be truly interesting, to where you have a lot of fans that feel like, well, you know, Louisville, they don't got Lamar Jackson. Should be a cakewalk, should be easy. Bama should blow right by them. And then, Bobby Petrino could have something up his sleeve where what should be a expected blowout could be a close game due to Petrino's a quarterback's coach, and he could have something brewing down there where the Cardinals are concerned.
To Stephen's point about having to continue the season after facing Alabama and getting beat up physically, regardless of what the final score is. Of course, Auburn made it through that gauntlet of 2 number ones in 3 weeks and successfully. And of course, despite winning, not easily in any fashion, it was a tough game, but they didn't have to go right down to the wire against the Tide. They got to about the 3 to 4 minute mark and salted the game away, but a very physical game, of course, as it always is. And then they had to get right up back off the deck, travel to Atlanta and face Georgia again in the SEC championship game. And despite a competitive first quarter, they weren't up to the task the second time. I misspoke in saying that one of Alabama's 2 opponents out of the East was Kentucky. For some reason, I had Kentucky in my head. Of course, it was Vandy last year. The Commodores feeling good about themselves after upsetting Kansas State, and then talked a little trash against the Tide and were flattened like 59-0. But it was Kentucky 2 years ago, I believe, that the Tide faced. So now it's Tennessee, the worst team in the division. Missouri, it'll be interesting to see Drew Lock, who's going to be a primary target in the NFL draft as a quarterback, of course, and some of the weapons that you mentioned that come back to Mizzou. They get most of their weapons back, aside from Jamon Moore, this upcoming season. And Jimbo Fisher, as you mentioned, entering the SEC Western Division, even though he doesn't necessarily have the guns this year to get it done. Going forward, the quality of coaching has taken a hit in the SEC over the last 5 years or so, and I believe it's coming back with the likes of what we've seen Kirby Smart pull off, most notably at Georgia. Will Muschamp doing a nice job going from 3 to 6 to 9 wins at South Carolina. And Barry Odom, again, under the radar, but taking a Missouri team that looked overmatched the previous season and getting to a bowl game at 7-5 this past season is a credit to him.
It really is. And I'm looking forward to seeing how a lot of these coaches do in this upcoming season, especially, Will Muschamp. A lot of people look at the SEC East as Georgia's division. They look at Florida and the other programs in the East, Florida, Tennessee, Missouri, Kentucky, kind of in rebuilding mode, and South Carolina's the one team that could possibly, give Georgia some more of a fight. And though I believe Jake Bentley will be a much better quarterback this season, I look at Florida and Dan Mullen, much like Bobby Petrino, is a quarterback's guy. You saw what Dan Mullen did with Nick Fitzgerald, Mississippi State. Prior to that, Dak Prescott. And then during his time at Florida, Tim Tebow and what he was able to mold with Tebow alongside Urban Meyer being the head coach down there for the Gators. Dan Mullen coming back to Gainesville. Question as well, who like John Pay Franks and Kyle Trash and the there are concerned. So South Carolina is the pick for a lot of teams in the East to really challenge Georgia. Ironically, under Jeremy Pruitt, it will take a minute for them to come in and kind of clean up behind Derek Dooley and a number of other coaches that have tried to take Tennessee and put them on that national power that Philip Fulmer had it going on before he immediately left the program and took a step down there. So aside from South Carolina, I want to see what Florida does in the SEC East. I want to see what Kentucky does in the SEC East. And for Derek Mason, it's like, what can you say? The guys at Vandy trying as hard out to get guys to believe and buy into Vanderbilt, and Nafale Alo, the guy that was talking the trash last year saying, hey, Alabama, you're next. And Alabama was next on the schedule, but Nafale Alo trying to say, Bama, you're next for you to get beat by us. And, Alo was in for a rude awakening there. But Derek Mason, the man, trying his heart out to bring something to that Vanderbilt nation to make them a team of reference, a team of recognition again. He's trying, but I got to go with Florida being that team that after South Carolina can really give Georgia a push there.
For a second consecutive year, Vandy losing one of the best linebackers in the SEC to the NFL draft in Owen Burks to the previous season, Zach Cunningham. Kyle Shermer back at quarterback for his senior season, looking to continue what he's done as Vandy has passed it better in the last year to 15 games.
No Ralph Webb, man. No Ralph Webb.
And no Ralph Webb. Yes, I was going to mention that. A 4 battle back situation there going into August, as I was looking at that just last night, and Kari Blasingame at Vandy would be the one guy with experience, but the rest of the guys, they do have a 4-star coming into the fray, and the other guys have been on the roster, but 4 backs battling for the job. And of course, you would expect there to be some running back by committee. Ralph Webb, one of the best running backs statistically in the history of the SEC, probably not in regards to talent, but have to certainly give that guy just tons of credit behind a Vandy offensive line that wasn't up to the caliber of some of his contemporaries in the top 10 all-time in SEC lore, and to be able to produce the kind of numbers that he did without a passing attack to back him up or give him any kind of relief is truly impressive by Ralph Webb. So we got Stephen M. Smith of Touchdown Alabama breaking down the defensive line for the Tide today. We addressed the scheduling. We'll have Stephen on very soon to talk Tide and address whatever else comes up in regards to recruiting and more positional previews for 2018. So, Stephen, we're going to wrap it up here. I got a few other a laundry list of some things to tidy up here with the audience. But other than that, I will let you go. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
appreciate it, Mark. We'll be back on soon to talk more Tide and take on more comments.
All right, Stephen, thank you so much. Enjoy your night. Again, Stephen F. Smith of Touchdown Alabama. You can join him on his show, The Way It Is, Fox at 97.9. I'd like to remind everyone out there that we'll be back on the live stream tomorrow. Right now, as it stands, we've got TCU scheduled for 1 Eastern time and Arizona State at 7 Eastern time. I also have contacted a number of ESPN 300 top recruits and have some interviews scheduled with them tomorrow afternoon. That's always hit or miss. You can understand the 17 and 18-year-old schedules and their at times ability to maintain a schedule and maintain track of appointments sometimes isn't the best. So I'm not going to promise that those are going to come through. But as it stands right now, I've got 3 interviews lined up with ESPN 300 recruits, some of the top high school football recruits in the nation. And again, TCU at 1 o'clock Eastern time and Arizona State scheduled for 7 o'clock Eastern time tomorrow on Mark Rogers TV. Getting set to cut my top 10 quarterbacks for 2018, my top 10 running backs, top 10 non-conference games, and so much more than that. Appreciate you guys jumping on the line and joining the chat. Uncle Lou and I did not connect today because of Father's Day, but we will be in touch soon and hopefully have Uncle Lou on to talk Georgia football and beyond very soon. Appreciate the support as always. Remember that if you want swag, then you subscribe to Alonzo1219, Alonzo1219 if you haven't already, and if you're a subscriber to him, and then you bring more subscribers to me than anyone else between now and July 15th, then you win the swag that I will feature here very soon. I need to cut a video and basically show you what the swag looks like, but it's you can go with, if you're a Miami fan, you can go with the Canes chain, the turnover chain, hats, T-shirts, but it doesn't have to be Miami. It can be whatever your college football preference or even sports, as I understand it, Major League Baseball, NBA, NFL, whatever. So we would appreciate that as we try to continue to build the community here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. You guys have a great Sunday. We will see you next time.